Hey everyone, I hope you've been doing well, all things considered. I've really been thinking a lot about religion lately. I criticize it all the time. And, I've learned to, as much as I criticize it, I've learned to see the utility that uh, other people see in it. And one thing I've really learned to respect about religion, even Islam, right? Especially Islam, because they have five prayers a day, they also have like a ritual bathing before every prayer session. They have like a ritual. They have to be like clean, like literally wash themselves every prayer session, right? I personally support that. I really think that's a great thing, you know? Although it's the fact that it's like a strict routine that I really don't uh, agree with. But at the same time, for somebody who for somebody who's like a genuinely just a good person, and they're also religious and they have that kind of routine, and they're not trying to I guess excessively sin, if that makes sense. Not like I have a problem with sinning, by the way, but there's people I've met who are like genuinely good people, genuinely helping, humanity, and they're also religious. They actually use. I really think they're people who they have a lot more, quote unquote, like spiritual uh, capabilities. They just so happen to find that whatever particular religion that they practice works for them. And I was just thinking about, all the concepts that religion claims to hold monopoly to, or religions, let me say, religions. They're really just things that different people have noticed. Different people have noticed the exact same thing, but because of their time and location, they thought it was so specific to their circumstances. And I was reflecting on the love is patient, love is kind verse. It's First Corinthians. I'll put it up. It's First Corinthians 13:4-8. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy. The reason why that verse came into my head, I was meditating a few days ago. And in as much as I see the 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 torturous conditions that a lot of human beings live in, I've somehow found a way to cope with it, because I think I'm just going to be talking a lot more just about like spiritual kind of stuff, because it's the only way to explain it that makes sense. Even whether or not you agree with it or not, whether or not it makes sense or not, I think it makes enough sense, right? I've really come to accept that everything, everything around us is energy, right? It is energy. I guess how you define energy maybe depends, but you know, uh, animated objects, inanimate objects, all of them have energy in them. All of them, I wouldn't say are alive, but they also are in some sense. And I guess I've realized what's helped me stay somewhat, mentally stable for so long, even across my life, right? There's something about patience that, it's not something you can really trust or you can know, but once you've experienced a level of patience in your environment, in your mentality, however it comes to you, it's sort of it's sort of like a final it's sort of like the only real prize for being here. I realized that, after doing all the meditation and the introspection that I do, it really just all comes down to patience. And the thing about patience is it can be really good, but it can also be really malevolent, right? Like it can be really, you can be patient in that I'm waiting for this thing and I know it's going to come and I know it will eventually, and then it does, right? Or it could be like I'm patiently waiting for my moment to strike back, or my moment to get revenge or whatever it may be, right? It's sort of double-sided in that sense. And it made me realize, it made me remember that verse, right? Love is patient, love is kind, and all that. At the same time, we can also say like that really doesn't, it's not really because that verse was about, how God is love and all that, but it doesn't really reflect the Abrahamic God to me much, or to anyone else who actually critically thinks. Whatever the case, I realized why I didn't like Christianity. I don't like Christianity or the Abrahamic religions in general, because they turned the Bible itself into an idol. That's why they don't actually read the things that are in the Bible, because to them the Bible equals God, right? And it's such a common it's such a common point, talking point against Christianity, that if you didn't have the Bible, how would you know that your God is actually talking to you, or your God is actually God, right? It's so coincidental that he himself didn't just drop the book down into somebody's hands and told him, now you know how to read, and read it exactly as I say it. No, he had to divinely inspire humans to write his words down, right? Which, they have whatever benefits or disadvantages, but to me it seems kind of fishy how like an all-powerful creator couldn't just like do the most obvious thing and just write down his words exactly as they are, give them to somebody exactly as they are, and give us enough evidence to see that he did it, right? Instead, what do? They cherry pick verses that sound good to them and live their lives like that. And when you bring up a verse that's inconvenient to them, you're probably challenging their faith, or you're possessed by the devil, or that's not, what it says is not what it actually says, right? They get to the point of saying what it says is not what it actually says. And that's just a level of cognitive dissonance that just will never make sense to me. And it got me really thinking, if human beings really have sinned, in a sense, they haven't sinned against any god, but they've sinned against themselves in terms of creating idols. And religion, especially monotheistic religions, it's so hilarious how ironic that the monotheistic religions in general, not just Abrahamic, but like, whichever other religions are monotheistic, they always find a way to repackage idolatry. Always. It's just, I guess it's just a thing that humans love doing, It's sort of like how in Islam, music is basically not allowed, right? Music is basically haram. If you go by what a lot of the scholars have written about it, it's like just not, it's really not permitted. But there's also, different opinions and everything, and there's different rules about what exactly you should do with the music and everything. Regardless, right? There's still, like, the Middle East has like thousands, since even the inception of Islam, like the whole way through, they have like a long, extensive history of music and musical instruments, which I'm glad for, by the way. Right? Don't actually follow those fucking rules because they're stupid. Even so, you see how long people have lived with this cognitive dissonance? We just practice the things that we do because our ancestors practiced the things they did without having to think about it. And it creates such an internal struggle in people's minds, but it also makes them even more defensive about what they're struggling about, right? And even though, and it's so funny because even though the Bible exists the way it does, there's just so many interpretations and denominations and readings of it and how you're supposed to read it and whether or not somebody else is supposed to read it for you, that I'm still shocked that there's somewhat of a consensus about it. Maybe it's just maybe it's just a function of like conformity. Like maybe, yeah, now it's religion has become more of a cultural thing rather than a religious thing, right? Because they're not the same. I personally think religions came out of culture and then the religion shaped the culture, right? The religions never come first. As much as they want you to think they did, they don't. The culture forms the religion, and then the culture is shaped by the religion, and so on and so on. And more so now, especially with these Abrahamic religions, it's more about the cultural religious aspect. That's how, like, there can be Christian atheists, right? Doesn't sound like it makes sense, but I think it's more in the terms of like they're culturally Christian, but their beliefs are atheist, right? Like I'm pretty sure in places like Northern Europe, that's basically the case, right? Most people don't believe in God, but they still get married in churches, right? And yet, nowadays, this is like the most perfect era for idolatry because of how prevalent social media is. Like once these corporations learned how to sell us back to us, it pretty much made idolatry like a permanent fixture in the future of humanity, right? It's not going to progress if idolatry doesn't continue to progress. And the danger of that is, what else? What else do you have left once you've turned yourself into an idol, but you've not really turned yourself into it. You've turned yourself into your ideal version, but as an idol, right? And the crazy thing about how this reality is they're always going to shift the goalposts and pull the rug. At every turn, every single turn, every time you get closer, it's always going to shift. Social media was the greatest thing ever created in humanity when it first started, the first few years of it. But eventually, we've learned that it's fucking terrible for most people. And yet, it just continues to become more and more and more ingrained into our lives. Like, I'm pretty sure you listening right now, anywhere you go sit down, whether in public or in private, somebody's always on their phone and they're always either on TikTok or Instagram or Twitter. Every time. Maybe it's even you. Maybe it's even me. There's not a single moment that it's almost like after 5 minutes of not touching your phone, somebody just gets the urge to just pick it up, scroll, whether it's Snapchat, WhatsApp, whatever. This is why I said in the first place that whatever conspiracies you have about uh like microchips and being injected into your wrist or your brain or something, it's not going to be by force. It's not going to be like 20 cops that bust through your door and are like, yeah, the government mandated communist chip is here, like put your wrist out. No, our psychology and really our biology have been hijacked against us. And these corporations want to do the thing that will make them the most money consistently every fucking year. And it just seems to me that the human ingenuity when it comes to exploitation is really endless. It's endless. Ethics is non-existent. Ethics is really, it just really isn't up for debate anymore, because like ethics is quite easily outweighed by like really fucking rich stakeholders, right? That's how it always happens. And this is probably going to be one of my hot takes, but I think human experimentation should be permitted, like voluntary, okay? Voluntary human experimentation should be allowed for scientific research. The reason I say this is, why the fuck do we have to wait for world wars or like wars and concentration camps and war crimes to be committed on human beings for us to progress further? For example, do you know how we know that the human body is 70% water? It came from World War II. That and a lot of other developments came from like the most violent torture inflicted on human beings up till that date, right? It's probably gotten much worse now. Like we can't even imagine it. So, you'll take the ethics into consideration, you take the safety risks and everything, but at the same time, I really think it would be a much more beneficial, there's only so much you can put a human being through, right? I'm not like saying you should go and fucking test out people's pain tolerances to some crazy degree, right? But it should be allowed. This idea, and it goes back to this idea of idolatry. Like we pretend that there's sanctity to human life, but society doesn't run that way. Society has made it so that you are not valuable if you don't produce monetarily, or you don't have a lot of monetary possessions, right? It's tied human life to finance, to money and status. And weirdly enough, the rich, while they're the ones who created and benefit from the system mostly, even them, the only reason they maintain this facade of happiness is just because they have all the drugs and prostitutes they could ever want, that any human being could ever want, right? They have all that at the disposal, so they can basically numb themselves while they bleed the rest of the world out. Why do we need to keep pretending like, human beings are so sacred and everything? And I've really realized just the sheer amount of vanity in modern culture. It's one reason why I'm happy I was never social to begin with. Somebody can be rejected just because of how they speak. They can be socially rejected just because of how they speak, or maybe like um, like a facial feature is a little bit off, or maybe they just, I don't know, don't look completely attractive enough, or just something. It's always something, right? That's why I've never found the urge to conform. Like, I'm polite. I'm really polite. But I do have a very hard time conforming. I fucking hate it. And especially if like conformity and authority, right? The somebody who has authority, in my opinion, has to deserve it. And if they abuse that authority, I would say that's one of my biggest pet peeves. That's why, like, politicians, fucking the clergy, even cops, the filthy ass fucking pigs, like, so much of society is unjustified to me, because I'm like, who the fuck are you? Who are you? What, like, why is it, something's not adding up, right? Especially when you talk to, when you interact with somebody who's acting on behalf of these institutions. And one reason I will never stop hating religion and religious institutions is for the sheer amount of just abuse of minors that they engage in, that they can excuse away with the fact that, we obey God's laws. We don't obey the laws of man. And, God forgives all sinners. I'm not kidding when I say that that has been their excuse from day one. That's all you have to, that's all they had to say to continue brutalizing children. Mostly boys, by the way. And these are boys who will never, like, I'd say a decent amount of them will never be able to resolve that trauma. And it's from that type of trauma that you create more predators. As much as, and why is it that we know these institutions are fucked up? Catholics know their institutions are disgustingly fucked up. Even a lot of these other religions, it happens in all these other religions as well, by the way. You don't even have to look far. You know your institutions are disgusting like this, but you're going to pretend that there's something to salvage from it, right? If your God was actually real and was actually benevolent and all loving, and you actually believed in him, you'd have burnt so many of these fucking churches to the ground by now. You yourselves. Instead, we make idols of them. I like church architecture myself. I really do. I like church architecture. I don't like the people that represent them, though. The vast majority of them. And to see how people are so eager to defend the terrible decisions of others just because they say they have a divine mandate. Sometimes I believe that, human beings were just born to be a species of sheep. Heck, even sheep aren't that fucking bad, right? Sheep will see a wolf and they'll run away. Humans will see a wolf, and then some humans will be convinced that, the wolf is working for them, or the wolf actually told them, they'll be higher than the other humans, right? We're the only species that can advocate for our own extinction, and we do it all the time. Just for a little bit more fucking, just a little bit more financial advantage, right? Okay, it may even be a lot. I don't know. But yeah, I've really had a lot to think about when it comes to idolatry, I wouldn't even necessarily say it's bad to make yourself an idol. Again, coping mechanisms are something that I have a hard time criticizing, especially when you understand what it is people are doing. Unless, of course, they're negatively affecting other people, right? If they're just coping mechanisms that look, that look strange or weird or peculiar, then it's just shock value. But yeah, I think that's all I have for today, for now, anyways. It's kind of hard getting the first video out, but I think I've got my flow back. I'll definitely be posting a lot more as the days go by. I hope.